Okay, so before you smash that dislike button so hard that your screen shatters or your mouse breaks, I'd just like to say that I am a huge fan of Edgar Wright. I love Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead and all of his other films, but I'm not a fan of Baby Driver. Whilst the film has some really great things going for it, like the cold open, the conflict established between Baby's personal life and his professional life, and some clever setups and payoffs along the way, I believe this film has some serious flaws that need to be addressed. I think the biggest issue is that Baby Driver doesn't know what it wants to be. The second half of the movie is almost the complete opposite of what we see in the first half. The first half sets up a light, comedic take on the heist genre, and the second half is an almost B-grade action flick that takes itself way too seriously. In the first half, we are introduced to a cute and quirky protagonist, and then by the end it's almost like he's an ill-fated tragic hero, which makes no sense because he was never set up to be portrayed that way. When we got to the second half, it almost felt like a completely different movie had started. If you mapped out the tone of the movie, it would probably look like this, with the first half mostly being a comedy, then the majority of the second half being an action, and the last 5 to 10 minutes being a tragedy, where the hero is given a chance at redemption, plus the tiniest sprinklings of all of these elements scattered along the way to give the illusion that these things belong together. Now, it's okay to mix elements from different genres. Hot Fuzz has elements of B-grade action flicks in it, especially in the second half, but knows it is still a comedy and utilises these elements mostly to parody them. It never becomes a B-grade action flick. When mixing genres so sloppily, it can really distract the viewer and makes your movie run the risk of being incoherent, which brings me to my next point. The character motivations in the second half felt forced and dishonest to the characters. So Doc, a hardened crime boss, just happens to find it in his heart with little more than a reaction shot to Debbie walking into the room to basically sacrifice himself for their love just because it reminds him of the love that he once had, even though throughout the movie he has never shared a tender moment with Baby and Baby pretty much ruined his entire operation and put him in danger. Yeah, I think it's a bit of a reach. Now if we take a look at Buddy, his entire motivation to avenge the death of Darling by killing Baby just doesn't make sense. I get how you could justify it to him being irrational, but the filmmakers never really make a point of that. If they wanted to make his intention more believable, they could have shown the killing of Darling from Buddy's perspective, or at least given him a reaction shot as he decides it's Baby's fault. Instead, we see Darling die from a neutral perspective, and then see Buddy immediately start shooting the cops because of her death. Then we see him reload and suddenly, without the actor taking any beats or time to emotionally process this, blame Baby for Darling's death. This makes the conflict of the rest of the movie less impactful, as it is built on such flimsy premises. However, I think the least probable of all motivations is Deborah's insistence to go on the run with Baby and pretty much risk her life for him when their relationship had barely begun. The movie hardly gives any screen time to their relationship, and in that screen time, all we see them do is awkwardly flirt at the diner twice, before awkwardly flirting again at the laundromat. Then we see them wine and dine together for barely 50 seconds, before their date is interrupted by Doc, where we spend over double that time on his conversation with Baby. After that, she then gets stood up by Baby twice, once at 2 in the morning, and he then puts her life in danger twice because of his professional life. Then immediately after she sees him shoot Buddy at point blank range, she decides to pretty much throw everything away and run away with him when she barely knows anything about him, and the secrets he tried to keep from her led to her life being threatened. But then, after all of that, she decides to still be with him while he's in prison, even though it could be up to 25 years before she could see him again. This just wouldn't happen. Not to mention that there is no implied time they would spend together outside of what I've just talked about. This motivation feels manufactured and seems like it's only really there because the script demanded it. Then beyond the character motivations, there is some action that is just not believable. So take this scene here. Doc gets shot twice in the chest, yet he still manages to get out this line,
"I thought I told you to run,"
without stammering or showing any signs of pain, before continuing to shoot the other person. Take the final confrontation between Buddy and Baby. Some of this stuff is just superhuman. Like after Baby supposedly pushes him off the edge and he thinks everything is fine, but then, he's still alive. I mean, seriously? When the car exploded after he'd fallen onto it, I honestly expected him to emerge from the flames like the freaking T-1000 from Terminator 2. Am I saying it's not okay to have unrealistic action? No! Hot Fuzz has some pretty crazy things happen, but that suits its tone, as the movie is a comedy and parodies hardcore action films. Yet in Baby Driver, these scenes are treated seriously, like the hardcore action films that Hot Fuzz parodied, and it just doesn't work. And the final issue with Baby Driver is that it just didn't feel like an Edgar Wright film. The movie was shot very conventionally with the exception of some one-ers. There were no signature Edgar Wright style montages, no distinct visual jokes through close-ups, which we are so used to seeing. And when we did get some quick cut montages of close-ups, they just kind of felt out of place. Almost like they were thrown in there, just cause. I think the first half of the film mostly resembled Edgar Wright, but when we got to the second half, it felt like he just checked out and subbed someone else in. As I mentioned previously, Edgar Wright is known for using intense action sequences, but there is usually a joke that he's trying to make with them. But I didn't feel that this time. I honestly felt like he was trying to replicate that style of filmmaking. Now, I'm okay with a director trying something new or experimenting in a different style, but Baby Driver just felt so detached from Edgar Wright, which makes me think that a higher power had a lot more say in the final product than he did. In this day and age, where less and less people are going to the cinema to watch films, studios would much rather play it safe and churn out something mediocre rather than take a risk and possibly produce something great. This results in studios mostly funding sequels, reboots and franchise films, as they are sure to make their money back at the box office. The fact that Baby Driver is an original movie, not based on any pre-existing source material, already puts the studio in a risky place, and it shows. It feels like they weren't sure whether they wanted a comedy, drama or action flick, so they tried to make it all of them to make distribution easier, but to no avail. It's a shame, because there was so much good in this movie, and it had so much potential. It makes me feel really confused, because while it is really sloppy in some areas, there is also a lot of care for detail in others. I won't go into this as there are many video essays which already cover this. I don't think Baby Driver is a bad movie, but it certainly is a flawed one. If Baby Driver had known what it wanted to be, allowed the plot to be character driven rather than forced through phony motivations, and more resembled Edgar Wright's iconic style, then we would have had a great, confident film. But instead, we were left with a good movie, prevented from being great by its insecurities.